It was a dark evening when Sandu quietly whispered goodbye. She couldn't stay. She told herself she had to leave, not for fun, but for duty. She had to go to work. As she stepped out, a sense of sadness filled the air. Her grandmother, still waiting back at home, would miss her. The streets she walked were dangerous. The place she was headed to was known for being far away and full of criminals. They were suspected of selling drugs there. And although the police had tried to clear it out, the danger still lingered. Sandu remembered that she once told her superiors how risky this area was. Reaching that place wasn't easy. It was far, covered in thick forests and blocked roads, almost unreachable by foot or vehicle. Her team suggested checking another area called Kia. It was filled with strange chemicals and substances, dangerous items that could harm many. One of the packages Sandu had recovered from that region was worth 20 million VND. Kia was not a safe place. Criminals often gathered there secretly to exchange illegal goods. It was a hidden playground for the worst kind of people. And the reason it worked so well for them was that no one dared walk through those empty streets. The quiet and isolation allowed them to do terrible things without anyone seeing. Investigating such places was not just difficult, it was frightening. The criminals were clever and fast, hiding in the thick trees or moving through the mud like shadows. When the officers tried to follow them, they would vanish into the darkness, leaving no trace. And if they got too close, the people living nearby would suffer. These criminals protected themselves by scaring the community. The fear spread like poison, and it made it harder for the police to do their job. Sandu knew if they couldn't stop these people, more innocent families would lose everything. That's why they had to act, even if it meant risking their lives. The authorities wanted to send help from the city, but it wasn't simple. The journey itself was hard. There was no clear road, no proper hospital nearby, only a small station far away. Despite all this, they had no choice but to move forward. They went to investigate two young men suspected of being involved. One of them had been standing near a girl, possibly someone innocent. That girl might have been caught in the crossfire, just like many others before her. The criminals didn't care who got hurt. Sandu's heart ached as she remembered the young woman. She had seen her being dragged into the jungle, later found collapsed and unconscious. The girl had to be rushed to the nearest place for medical help, but it wasn't even a real hospital. Sandu feared the worst. The girl had lost a lot of blood and might not survive. No one knew who she really was or why she ended up there, but she could have been someone's daughter, sister, or friend. The GPS signal was weak. No one could say for sure where they were anymore. But what they all knew deep inside, this place was no longer just a location on a map. It had become a battlefield of fear, pain, and secrets. As the investigation grew deeper, more questions began to rise. Who was this injured girl, and why was she left alone in such a terrifying place? One of the officers, Mr. Diep, offered to take responsibility and said he had experience handling such situations. He had been sent to protect the area and make sure everything inside the house remained safe. It was clear now that the girl needed more than just treatment. She needed protection, care, and answers. The officer in charge agreed to let him help, but not without concern. They still didn't know if the girl had any connection to the criminals they were after. Sandu, watching everything unfold, felt heavy inside. Memories of another young girl, Diep, came flooding back. She whispered her name quietly, not even realizing it had escaped her lips. Diep, someone she had once known deeply, someone who had once smiled but now felt so far away. The pain in Sandu's voice was real, and it echoed the pain in her heart. It had been days since she last saw Diep, but her absence still felt fresh, like a wound that wouldn't close. She had looked everywhere but found nothing. Only silence answered her calls. And now here was another girl, lying injured and unknown, as if the world was repeating itself. The officers couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Too many young women had disappeared. Too many times they had come too late. And this wasn't just about drugs anymore, it was about human lives, torn and discarded like they meant nothing. They decided to expand the search, to reach beyond just the nearby communes. Maybe she was taken to Van Swan or Ben Kim, or somewhere even farther. But they needed permission, and more than that, they needed support, money, manpower, and the strength to keep pushing. One of the officers, desperate to continue, asked for help to fund this extended search. He promised to try with his own friends, even if it meant walking alone into dangerous places. The police were doing what they could, but the fear was growing. Some whispered that maybe the missing girls were being taken for something worse, sold, hidden, or hurt beyond recognition. And others believed the criminals were too powerful, too rich to be caught. One of the suspected masterminds, Yoan, was being investigated. He denied everything. He said the drugs weren't his, that the packages were bought with money from a legitimate business. He even claimed someone from Laos had sent them to him, but no one believed him. It all felt too smooth, too well prepared, like someone had practiced hiding the truth for years. His bank accounts told another story. 2 secret accounts, one in HM Bank and another in Switzerland, both hard to trace. The truth was buried under layers of lies. Maybe he was just a piece of the puzzle. Maybe someone bigger was pulling the strings. The officers began to suspect that this case was much larger than it seemed. There were trails leading out of the country, possibly to Thailand. That's where many of the goods were going, packed neatly and shipped across borders. But no one had the full picture yet, and every new clue brought more fear than relief. Despite the pressure, they couldn't stop. Not now. Too many lives had already been broken. Too many girls like Diep had vanished without a voice. Sandhu stood quietly by the hospital bed, watching the unconscious girl breathe softly. In that moment, she promised herself she would not stop until she found Diep, and until she found justice for every girl who had suffered in silence. The days became longer and heavier as Sandhu and the investigators pushed deeper into the shadows of the case. While the injured girl remained unconscious, Sandhu stayed by her side as much as she could, watching her closely. Every breath the girl took reminded her of Diep, and that painful mystery of where she might be now. The officers had now received permission to investigate 2 more communes, hoping for a clue. But it was not just about police work anymore. It was becoming personal. These weren't just names on paper. They were real lives and real pain. Mothers waiting for their daughters, families torn apart by fear, and girls like Diep, disappearing into silence with no one to hear their screams. Meanwhile, the investigation into Yoan revealed darker truths. His connections stretched far, even into the hidden corners of international trade. On the surface, he appeared clean, a businessman with a friendly face, claiming that everything he handled was legal. But behind that smile was a storm of secrets. He had access to large amounts of capital, 2 separate bank accounts, one of them protected in Switzerland. Transactions were being traced, but they were layered and masked through dozens of transfers. He said the goods were just regular items: leather, fashion materials, finished products. But the truth began to unravel. Some shipments didn't match the documents. And the more they looked, the more they found missing girls linked to towns he had visited. Sandhu began to speak to more people in the town. An old woman remembered seeing a girl matching Diep's description weeks ago, wandering near the forest line. Another man recalled strange trucks coming late at night, unloading boxes without any markings. They were always fast and quiet, gone before anyone could ask questions. A fisherman spoke of hearing cries at night, near the abandoned riverside buildings, but he was too afraid to look. Fear had silenced everyone, and now Sandhu realized maybe that's what allowed these people to keep doing what they were doing. Fear was their weapon. Silence was their shield. But Sandhu refused to be afraid anymore. At the hospital, the unconscious girl finally began to move. Her fingers twitched, and she whispered something, too soft to understand. But Sandhu held her hand gently and whispered back, "You're safe now. You're not alone." Tears slipped from Sandhu's eyes, not just because of the girl lying in that bed, but because of all the others who never made it there. All the girls who never got a chance to speak. The officers grew more determined, gathering maps and sending scouts to the communes. The search was now wider than ever. They knew time was running out. James, who had remained quiet during most of the early investigation, suddenly stepped forward. He had connections in Thailand and offered to talk to some of the suppliers personally. He warned them, if they were involved, there would be consequences. But getting information was hard. The people working in these operations were trained to stay silent. They trusted no one. Some didn't even know what they were handling. It was a cold, calculated machine. But James had his own reasons. Somewhere in his heart, he too felt the weight of guilt. Guilt for letting things go unnoticed for so long. For staying silent when he should have spoken. For choosing comfort over confrontation. Now he wanted to make it right. Sandhu, James, and the officers began working together. Each night was a meeting, each morning a new lead. They chased rumors, they followed trucks, they searched through records. Still, no one knew where Diep was. But Sandhu refused to stop. She believed Diep was out there, still alive, still waiting. And that hope was the only thing keeping her moving. Her hands shook. Her heart ached, but she didn't let go. Each moment felt like a lifetime. Each unanswered question, like a knife to the soul. Yet she kept walking. Through fear. Through pain. Through darkness. Because somewhere a girl was crying. Somewhere, a girl was begging to be found. And Sandhu had made a promise. She would not stop until that girl was in her arms again. The fourth and final part of this story unfolds in the weight of silence, in the quiet hours where hope flickers between light and darkness. Sandhu stood at the edge of the hospital corridor, looking at the girl who had finally opened her eyes. Though she was awake, she was broken. Her voice trembled, her eyes filled with fear. She couldn't speak much, but the few words she managed were like daggers. She whispered of a dark place, of cold walls and locked doors. She didn't know where she had been taken, but she remembered screaming and no one hearing her. The fear in her eyes was enough to make Sandhu's knees shake. It wasn't just her story, it was Diep's story, too. And perhaps the story of so many others. James returned with more disturbing truths. After several conversations and quiet threats, one of the Thailand contacts finally broke. He confessed that shipments from Vietnam had increased. Some crates were heavier than they should be. No questions were asked. Some were sent to underground warehouses. James's voice cracked as he spoke. He looked at Sandhu and whispered, "I think we've been blind for too long." His eyes said everything. The regret, the shame, the anger. He knew now that what he had ignored for so long had become something monstrous. And now it was personal. He wasn't just helping because he had to. He was helping because he had been a part of the silence, and now he wanted to be the voice that broke it. Back in the commune, officers finally reached the abandoned riverside. What they found made their hearts freeze. Pieces of torn clothing, burned journals, and in the darkest room, a small bracelet that matched one Diep's mother described. Sandhu held it in her trembling hands and wept. The forest had buried their secrets well, but the wind could no longer cover the cries. Sandhu closed her eyes and remembered Diep's laughter. The way she would smile in the sun, the dreams she once shared. That smile was now replaced with emptiness. But Sandhu still hoped. Maybe Diep was still alive. Maybe they would find her in time. And even if they didn't, Sandhu swore she would speak for her. She would be the voice Diep was never allowed to have. James took full responsibility. He opened up about the Swiss account, about everything Johan had done under their noses. He released public statements, faced lawsuits, and let the world know that behind the polished glass walls of business was a darkness they had ignored. He told the police everything. He named names. He begged the victims' families for forgiveness. Not everyone forgave him. Some mothers screamed at him in rage. Others simply walked away, unable to look him in the eye. But one woman, the mother of another missing girl, placed her hand on his and said, "At least now someone listens." The young girl in the hospital was moved to a safe facility. She would never be the same again, but she was alive. Slowly, she began to heal. One day, she asked to see Sandhu. With trembling fingers, she drew a map of where she had been taken, a place near the border. It matched one of the unsearched locations. Immediately, the team moved. And there, in an old warehouse, they found signs of another girl. Not Diep, but someone else who had gone missing months ago. It gave them more strength, more urgency. The search widened again. The names became faces, and the faces became the fire they needed to keep going. Sandhu never gave up. She continued the search for Diep. Every morning she woke up with one question in her heart: where are you? And every night she prayed, not for justice anymore, but simply for a chance to see her again. In the end, they never told us if Diep was found. The story didn't end with a clear answer, but it ended with a promise that no girl would ever be forgotten, that every cry in the dark would be heard, and that those who suffered in silence would never suffer alone again. This wasn't just a story about crime. It was a story about courage, about the fight for the voiceless, about how one person's love can break through the strongest walls of silence. Sandu became more than an investigator. She became a mother to the broken, a sister to the lost, and a voice for those who never got the chance to speak. And to you, watching this story, may we all remember, never ignore the silence. It often hides the loudest pain. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter.